module, we are going to look at what is considered the major feast, first of all, of for the devout Jew, and minor feast, and there's a lot of them. And there's also what are some of the other practices if you are going to, stay kosher and to be true to the Torah. Rosh Hashanah. Its New Year comes in the early autumn where sins are forgiven and relationship begins anew. It's like you clean your computer. It's a reset. You rebooting of your life, if you will. You begin with the blowing of the shofar. And the shofar, you'll see in the next slide, is a ram's horn. I had one once upon a time. In fact, it was when I went to Meir Sharim, the Hasidic place in Jerusalem, I bought one. He said, this isn't kosher. And I said, well, that's all right. I'm not Jewish. He said, they're great. So anyways, but it was good for a demonstration. And so one of the ritual practices people do is they'll dip apples in honey, and they're hoping then for a sweet year ahead. Also, that there's 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So you kind of get a start before then you take the next step of looking at where are my sins? What do I need to do for the coming year? Here's the shofar. Maybe some of you are familiar with, if you're not Jewish, the Godspell, where prepare the way of the Lord, where they blow the ram's horn, or you see that sometimes offered in television shows, and it is said a ram's horn where they can blow. It's blown to announce a religious occasion or to sound an attack in battle. On Rosh Hashanah, the shofar is sounded 100 times to awaken the soul to the need for repentance. At the conclusion of Yom Kippur is also blown. It's kind of like the brackets to signal the end of the fast. Most sacred day, if you want to say, for Jews, is Yom Kippur. And again, it's 10 days after Rosh Hashanah. It is Jews communally and individually confess their sins. Again, if any days in which a Jew will go to the synagogue, it will be this day. And it's also the one day where Jews will publicly can prostrate themselves because that's sacred. And it begins with a Kol Nidra. And the Kol Nidra, again, there's a YouTube about that. You tell God, you nullify your promises to God. Say, oh God, I'm going to make a promise to you. I'll get in trouble later on, maybe 4 months from now or whatever, relationship or pay the bills. But if I don't fulfill it, I wasn't serious. Well, I wasn't serious, but just don't take it to heart. It's not the covenant level. It's just, so we're going to nullify it. It's like an escape clause for the coming year. So will begin the beginning of Yom Kippur. By the way, there's a full complete fast from sun up to sundown. From sundown to sundown. Full day unless health ensues. But that's the idea. So you don't eat, and if you're in some Orthodox communities, you wear white. And the concluding service is called the Nila, and it symbolizes that the gates of heaven now are closing on the possibility of repentance. Then there's Sukkot. This is 5 days after Yom Kippur. So you can see that these feasts are all interconnected, at least these autumnal feasts. It'll last 7 days. And Sukkot harkens back the harvest theme, and they build to build a tent in your home, or maybe out in the backyard. And it reminds them, and hypothetically, if they can sleep in it, or at least spend as much time as possible in it, as a reminder of your wanderings in the wilderness. As you're seeing, one thing about these, except for to some degree Yom Kippur, but most of these feasts now going forward are all family centered. They're centered in the home. And this is one key, which is something unique about Judaism, is this family-centric aspect about rituals and celebration, which, if you look at the history of the religion, this is important, is through all the pogroms and the persecution, the Holocaust, and the wanderings, the ghettos, it is the one thing. It is that maybe the fact that they're decentralized in the sense of, rather than a worship since the temple was destroyed back in this year 70, that this has been a great resource and strength of and why Judaism has thrived all these millennia. And then you conclude with the annual reading of the Torah, which is the first 5 books in the book of Moses. In fact, that you do in the annual year, you'll do a lectionary, or you take the Torah, go through the year. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And so one thing about the Sukkah, and the Hebrew Bible, the Israelites are commanded to live in huts or sukkot for a week. This is done as a celebration of the Exodus, remembrance of the Exodus, and a celebration of the fall harvest. Remember, a lot of these are rural folks, and so these historical events are also tied into agricultural rhythms as well, which is another source of the power and the perdurance of these particular feasts. And on Sukkot, as I mentioned, Jews pray, eat, and sleep, if it's outdoors, weather permitting, in the Sukkah, which is built especially for this festival. It'll be something families can do together. All the Jewish major feasts, the one that maybe is most familiar to non-Jews is Passover or Pesach. And Passover is so much associated, of course, the movie The Exodus, the great pivotal event of escape and liberation. It's also, of course, is in the context of Passover time, if ones are Christians, that the Last Supper is celebrated. So Passover is in a very, very much part of, in the Seder meal, with the larger culture. It is celebrated in the springtime. It's a 7-day festival, although again, there's a little variation between if you're Reformed or Orthodox, how long you celebrate it. And the historical connection is remembrance of the deliverance from Egypt, and also deliverance of nature from winter. So again, there's a connection, that dual connection with the agricultural roots as well as the historical remembrance of liberation and escape. Let my people go. In the home, the Seder meal is unleavened bread. It's all important. Everything's symbolic. They didn't have time, so the bread has to be unleavened because they had to hightail it out. Remember, they marked their doors in the book of Exodus before the angel of death comes, and they, hightail it out. So everything's on the fly. And so there's all kind of the quickness, the apple with, there's represents the mortar that they use with chopped nuts, the horse rice. So there's this very powerful symbolic connection. And you always have, the youngest son, the question, so, well, Father, why is this night different than any other night? So that one aspect of religious ritual is that and this is Passover as much as any embodies this, is that you enter into the experience of, you're just as present as would have been 3,000 years ago when the original Israelites are hightailing it, out of Egypt, and you are participating in that. The instructions then are given in the Haggadah, and means telling in Hebrew, and you can see that there's both kind of a commentary on the story of Israel's deliverance. It's a ritual book too. It is also hymns and prayers that guide you through the celebration of Passover. And there's also always a cup of wine, the room for Elijah is going to return. So there's always something, a gift. And the synagogue is decorated with greens and flowers. And at this time is a time of marriages and renewal of the covenant. So Shavuot, which is word for Pentecost. Again, this is 7 weeks after the Passover spring festival of harvest, and you'll see that connection when we get to Christianity and the Christian feast of Pentecost, which is commensurate with with this remembrance of Shavuot, and just as we get into the Good Friday and the events around when we saw the 3 days or Holy Week tied into Passover. So that, again, there's a 7 weeks, close to 50-day separation between the two feasts. And what Shavuot recalls, Shavuot, giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. And the highlight in the synagogue is then the reading of the Ten Commandments. So this is when the law was given to Moses. So there's a public reading, usually celebrated for 2 days. And the highlight, and there's also a reading from the book of Ruth. And of course the story of the young Moabite woman who, my people, who joins the young widow, who joins with her in-laws and becomes aligned with the people of Israel. It's also found, in the Hebrew Scriptures. There are minor feasts as well, a couple of which have some ancient biblical roots, and then there's some actually modern connected maybe with the modern Jewish history and with the state of Israel. And so some of these, the more famous, are Hanukkah and Purim. Hanukkah, maybe you know, is celebrated around the winter solstice, usually just prior to Christmas time. it is 8 days remembering. What it does is that after the successful the Maccabean revolt, the temple was taken and the liberation happened, and they want to rededicate the temple, but there wasn't enough oil. But miraculously, they called it a miracle because it burned for 8 days, and so this was a rededication. So it kind of ties in with the miracle of God's hand. It's also the sense of rededication of remembering the temple itself. Of course, there's gifts given during that time, and then that these they'd say it kind of connects with maybe borrowed from Christianity or Christmas, the secular Christmas version of gift giving. So it always jokes about giving socks or whatever, how many underwear you get, but there's a sense that for 8 days you give a gift every day in a lot of the tradition of Hanukkah. There's also they play the dreidel, the great the Hebrew letters, a great miracle occurred there about again having to do with the temple. Of course, as the text points out, that great miracle occurred there for a lot of the Zionists. I mean, it's also the Jewish state. Purim is celebrated in the spring, end of January, early February. I remember when I first came to Israel and was studying there, and I came in the beginning of February, and there's all this carnival festival, people dressed in costumes. I thought this is like Halloween, but there's that sense about that. It recalls there's costumes and drinking of wine, a special meat dish, and giving to the poor, and it's in there's acts out oftentimes the story of Esther, and again there's both Hanukkah and Purim. There's YouTube videos that refer to that. Especially, I'd recommend the Purim, the story. If you're not familiar with the story of Esther, it's interesting because it's one book in the Bible where there's not any direct reference to a specific divine intervention, a miracle, but all these little synchronicities happen where deliverance occurs and the people are saved. Some other more modern festivals: Tu B'Shavat, Tisha B'Av, and Yom HaShoah. And pardon me that my Hebrew, I don't have it. Tu B'Shavat, it's similar to Arbor Day. And at this time, it's trees are planted and money given to the poor. Remember, there's a lot of stuff about trees are planted in Israel to for the climate, change that. It's, a good thing. So, and then Midsummer's Tisha B'Av, it commemorates, it's kind of a sad day, the book of, when they read the book of Lamentations, and it remembers the destruction of both the first temple by the Babylonians and the second temple by the Romans. And then the third is Yom HaShoah, and it recalls the Holocaust. And so it's a Memorial Day. And so it's a very, very somber, reflective day to remember where you were and how you were delivered in the sacrifice of those who've come before you. Sabbath is not a minor feast. It's something that you do every week. And if you're devout, I remember when I was in Israel, Friday afternoon after close of dinner till Saturday evening for the 24-hour period, you better be home because nothing ran. Not everything was closed, all the stores, everything, including the cabs or bus lines. You had to factor that into your weekly schedule that you had nowhere to go. It was a time of regeneration, rest, renewal. This is the only festival that is prescribed in the commandments, and that God rests on the seventh day. I will see how this differs with Islam. But here in Judaism, God, after creation, it's all good, makes creation, you take a break. And that's why you have sabbatical years, and you have the Jubilee year, every, the 50th year where the debtors, not only debtors are released from prison, land goes fallow, but the properties return to the original owners. So as I said, there's a sabbatical every 7th year, and the Jubilee year is every 50th year, where those in prison and debts are released and lands return to original owner. So it's basically a reminder that God is God, that we are, we're not in control of anything, and we got to let go, which is a deep spiritual wisdom in this. And the special Sabbath prayer is the Kaddish. Kaddish, actually, for those of you who are like liturgical Christians, there is a form of the Kaddish that's prayed at when my tradition, the offertory of the Mass, but say, blessed are you, Lord, for the different gifts that we have received, and for the bread and the wine that we have. The Sabbath or Shabbat begins on Friday night and celebrated both in the home and in the synagogue. The lighting of candles consecrates the home to God. And traditionally, this is something, although not of male domination, but the mother and the daughter have a special role to play here in the lighting of the candles. The rites of passage in Judaism, very, very important. Circumcision, or the brit milah, is done on the 8th day. And even in the Christian scriptures, the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is circumcised on the 8th day. And so it is a sign of the covenant again. And then the next big-ish day is the bar mitzvah, or bat mitzvah, if in Reformed tradition for girls at puberty. Remember, years ago we took our confirmation class, parish to Temple Bethel, for 1 year bar mitzvah and another bat mitzvah, and I think our kids were so impressed by their peers who read in Hebrew, preached from the pulpit, and then basically ran the service and was able to take the scroll the Torah out and process up and down the center aisle out of the tabernacle. Another thing you just mentioned, for burial customs, if you're Orthodox, just know that it's done with a simple wood coffin and an open bottom. Interesting for me that I've been involved with the Green Burial Council, and Green Burial movement is one of my little side notes in over the years. But the Orthodox have never departed from that. So both signs of life. But when you're a bar mitzvah, you become like a man. Although there's now confirmation. Your book talks about it here, but confirmation is now can be done now. It's like this again. This just as they said that the yarmulke is taken. That is worn, that was taken from the beretta the priest would wear, and so confirmation is taken from Christian confirmation, that now that you are adult, that you're the kind of life. So it's it's they thought it was ceremonial, so they wanted more of a retake more of an ownership. So let's look more at the bar mitzvah. It's a covenant as information. It becomes a part of ritual practice in the Middle Ages. And the bat mitzvah is introduced in the United States in 1922 by Rabbi M. Kaplan. And again, recent years confirmation of borrowing from the Christian sacrament is a time when 17-year-old makes profession of faith during Shavuot service. Is the chuppah is, I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but is very important. The Jewish marriages are consecrated ritually under a canopy, a chuppah, that represents the home which the bride and groom are about to establish. The prayers are recited under the chuppah. The marriage contract is given to the bride, and a wine glass is shattered by the groom, and it's a sign of new life together. And then you put together, the past goes on. If you saw Fiddle on the Roof, there's that sense of a flavor about the sacredness of the marriage ceremony. One thing was there is that the ketubah is a prenuptial betrothal, which is now baked into the actual Jewish marriage. Once upon a time, that there was a betrothal before the actual marriage ceremony. So it was kind of like this. It was more than an engagement, but someone's legally married, but you weren't living together yet. And if that sounds familiar, if you're a Christian, the story of Mary and Joseph, that was the situation that they were in when Mary was pregnant with Jesus. The Jewish funerals, there was already mentioned that if you're Orthodox, that there's open casket or the ground, very simple. But regardless, so you are supposed to be, death is something very, very simple. You bathe and wrap the body in a shroud. If you're devout, you put bury the body in a pine box. There's mourning on the part of close relatives for a week, they call sitting Shiva. And the somber state carries over for 30 days before you really get going with life again. And you're not supposed to put a tombstone for 11 months after the passing. And then you light candles once a year on the day of passing. Is the daily life of Jew, the devout Jew lives by kosher. There's dietary laws, a kashrut, ritual fitness, which really comes from Torah. To mention, right from Leviticus chapter 11 and chapter 14 of Deuteronomy. So, for instance, there's no flesh of horses, pigs, and birds of prey, as well as shellfish that are part of this. Accepted meat must be slaughtered by a ritual slaughterers called a shoshet, who drains the animal blood. So they have to be drained of all blood. And meat and dairy must not be prepared together, but used with separate utensils. As a matter of fact, there are some kitchens that have separate facilities. On one half the kitchen is the meat, one half the dairy. So ne'er the twain shall meet. So if you want to say this is kosher, and it has to probably have a desert experience, but it is very much a part of a devout Jew will eat only meat and dairy and stuff that are kosher and avoid certain foods altogether. What's the daily spiritual life for the devout Jew? There's specific times for prayer laid out in the prayer book, and you have a minyan when you have a quorum of 10 people for communal prayer. So it used to be 10 men. I think it's still in Orthodox or maybe even conservative Judaism, but not Reform. But 10 people get together, and then you can start to have service wherever they can communal prayer, and and you wear the yarmulke. See if they're the cab, the talith, the prayer shawl, and then sometimes you see a little thing with a sticking out they wear over their forehead, the phylacteries with those are called phylactery tefillin, or phylacteries with the words of the Torah on their, on their forehead. So in prayer, the Judaism, they mention their set times, 3 times a day, morning, late afternoon, and evening. And during the morning prayer, the males wear that prayer shawl, the tallit, and the phylacteries on their arm and forehead as symbols of the divine presence. And devout Jewish married females will participate in a ritual bath, again, the mikvah. And this usually happens at the end of their menstrual period, conclusion. It's kind of a cleansing period. And both of these prayer implements, I should say the prayer shawl and the phylactery are fulfillment of particular biblical commands. Becomes, who is a Jew? One becomes either by birth, if your mother's a Jew, or by conversion. And conversion is difficult. It's not a highly evangelical religion. They say there's 3 evangelical religions in the world: Christianity, Islam, and some degree Buddhism. So we'll be talking about Judaism or Christianity and Islam next. But if you're converted, you must be circumcised. If you're a man, or if you're a woman, take part in the ritual bath, the mikveh. And women are barred from consideration of the quorum, the minyan, or becoming rabbis. However, Reform Judaism and Reconstructionist Judaism are much different in that one regard. And I don't know what's going on. There may be some movement in conservative Judaism. I'm not sure what's going on there, but certainly Reform and Reconstructionists, you have female rabbis. And one female rabbi said he was a Reconstructionist Jew. Halakha or halacha is a code of laws, the halakha, that prescribe how a Jew should live in every aspect of life. Mitzvah is part of the context of that life of halakha. Virtue is its own reward. You don't do it because I'm going to get reward in heaven. You do it because it's the right thing to do, period. Enjoy life, but not overdo it. L'chaim, as they say, again, fiddle on the roof. Tzedakah is justice and righteousness. And of course, shalom is peace in the community. And again, shalom isn't just absence of conflict. It means wholeness. It means health. And it's summed up, of course, in the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The idea is to extend righteousness and social justice. If this is God's relation with us, we were made righteous, then we show that we are co-creators or part covenant relationship with God by extending that more just world. So you see a lot of people, very active in the history of social justice movements have been very much popular. Jewish voice has been very strong in leadership and in activism. You hope to pursue peace, shalom. Since the Holocaust, Israel has become an anchor for probably most Jews around the world, not all, but most. And the coming of the Messiah, there's a coming of Messiah, either personal or perhaps a messianic age, will bring in a new age when all folk will worship the one true God. Said in Isaiah, in this mountain, the Lord of hosts will provide for all peoples. Now the Jews are covenant people. They're the chosen or the treasured people who are called by God to give an example to the world. So they got to walk the talk. And tikkun is to repair the earth, and it's basically a basis for Jewish environmentalism. The devout Jew, what's ultimate reality? The one God of Torah is ultimate ultimate reality, and the divine being is transcendent yet immanent, almighty, benevolent yet just, the creator and sustainer of all things. He's revealed in the Torah and in the natural world. How should we live in the world? What's this world? Human life should be lived in conformity to the will of God. The commandments, the mitzvot of the Torah, are the embodiments of that will. And human beings are morally complex. We're torn between good and evil. But prayer, meditation, and the performance of good deeds enable us to overcome evil. Tim Schilt. A personal reflection question. You see how powerful this is in Jewish tradition. So question just to think about, what are some family traditions with which you grew up? It could be different things, from ethnic traditions or just things you did. And from where do these traditions derive? And again, if you had these traditions, what was the impact of those traditions on you and your family as you grew up as a child? Those annual traditions. It could be around the holidays, birthdays, all kinds of ways. Rites of passage.